So as the oldest from a family of 16, I did a lot of from scratch cooking when I was growing up. And one of my family's favorite cookbooks was this well-loved book by Rita Van Amber, full of recipes and anecdotes from the Great Depression. And recently rereading it, I came across 3 points that could help all of us save money while trying to feed our family in this difficult economy. I'm Andrea. I am a mom of 8 children, and I have been interested in health and cooking from scratch food for as long as I can remember. The first thing that really stuck out to me were these mothers were really big on doing one-pot meals. Now, depending on where you were in the country, these one-dish meals would have a large amount of some type of healthy carb, be that beans or rice or potatoes or bread, and then some type of gravy. Remember, can of whatever soups was not something that was used in the day. When weather was too dry for crops to grow, the chickens still fared fairly well. They'd scratch all day for seeds and bugs and kept right on laying eggs. When egg prices dropped to 10 cents a dozen, then 9 and even 8 cents, women learned to use them in every imaginable way in their cooking. Noodles were made for soups, or as a main dish with bacon grease or butter poured over, garnished with dry bread croutons, or baked with apples sliced in between with a bit of butter, sugar, and cinnamon added. Out of this was born the yummy hot dishes, which became the vogue when the potato crop had dried up. There are a lot of recipes in this book that are simply proteins with gravy to really stretch that protein. And there's actually a lot of science behind this. If you are making a true gravy with broth, the amino acids in the broth are actually an incomplete protein. So if you are using less protein in your meal, this is actually stretching that protein content. The good housewife would use the protein she had on hand. If she had eggs, she'd make a lot of noodles and possibly some type of gravy. Some families were so poor that their gravy was really just flour, water, salt, and pepper. And luckily, I don't think most of us are there today. We can make exceptionally good gravies. You just make a roux with equal amounts of butter and flour, and you can add milk or broth for some extra protein. And really having these 3 components, the carb, the gravy, and a little bit of protein, can make a very nutritious meal. I think a lot of us picture the ideal meal having your main serving of meat, like steak or chicken breast, and then you have your veggie, and then you have your carbohydrate. When you mix them all together like this, it really stretches the meat quite a bit more. I know in our family, one of our favorite 30-minute quick meals for those busy nights is simply baked potatoes with a gravy on top with more or less meat, or even just a lot of grated cheese. Now, families in the Depression often didn't have butter because cream was something that still did make money and was worth selling. So you see that they often used lard a lot. One of the lunches that a lot of kids mentioned having was bread with lard and sugar on top because they didn't have the berries for jelly. I hope most of us have not been reduced to that yet. But this kind of leads into the next thing I noticed that a lot of these mothers did for their family. And it's something that is kind of going against, I would say, mainstream popular wellness culture, and that is they relied heavily on grains and not so much on meat for their protein. Now, let me say that I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan, and I'm not planning on going that route anytime soon, but there's no denying that buying meat, especially high quality pastured, organic, grass-fed meat, is going to be the most expensive thing in your budget. So the best thing to do is to try and stretch those proteins with high quality grains. And honestly, this really isn't something just from the Depression. Every culture has their main staple whole grain that the common people have raised their family on, some type of bean or rice, of course bread or corn. For my family, we really had to rely more on grains to stretch our proteins. And when I say grains, I mean whole grains, because obviously the white grains really don't contain a lot of nutrition. So of course there's always the proverbial beans and rice that people use to save money. And I've been trying to incorporate beans and rice more intentionally in all of our meals. Especially beans can be a little bit hard. Most of us know about, Mexican or Tex-Mex food, and that's the most familiar way of eating beans to us. And I think that's a great place to start. You can do your own refried beans, which is really easy. You just add a little bit of lard and a lot of spices. That's the big thing with beans and rice, is adding spices. But I really encourage you to go and look at other cultures who eat a lot of beans and rice. So mothers from the Great Depression didn't have cookbooks like we have today. They couldn't go look up a recipe on Pinterest, and they didn't have access to all the great spices that we have available in our grocery stores. But there are so many delicious recipes using chickpeas from the Middle East or Italian bean soups. There are recipes using whole grains like Mediterranean salads that are so good. By making your own whole grain cereals in the morning, even an easy way to do this, it's mentioned a lot in this cookbook. They call it Grot, G-R-O-T. It's a German or Norwegian recipe using rice, so you could have rice porridge in the morning. I have done this with my family before, like a type of rice pudding, and it was a really nice substitute for oatmeal. Everyone really liked it. Of course, in our country, bread has always been a big staple of our diet, and it's wonderful that sourdough has really come to the forefront. Ever since lockdown, people had more time to cook. But I want to say that just cooking sourdough is not going to necessarily give you more nutrients. It will make the bread more easily digestible. But it would be great if you could do sourdough and add in some whole grains, the freshest whole grains you can possibly find. Sometimes your health food store will have freshly milled grain, or you can do like I did and invest in a grain mill and either add some to your bread or do 100% fresh milled bread. I've been playing around with this a lot lately, and fresh milled sourdough bread is absolutely delicious, and it is so filling. Reading one of these memories from the books, How We Got Flour. During the 1930s, every community had its flour mill, and we had Dobmeyer's roller mill. Now, most of these mills are no longer milling flour and its byproducts, which is what this is all about. So these families would use all of the flour, including the bran, and I'm sure this is why they maintain their health. Getting good, clean grains is really a great way to stretch your budget. And doing those one-pot meals like I was talking about before, adding gravies is going to add more protein without the high price tag of cooking with individual cuts of meat. I want to ask you a question. When you are clearing the dinner table, do you ever have food that you are giving to your dogs, your cats, your chickens, or maybe just throwing away? I know that I do sometimes. The average American family, they say, throws away 30 to 40% of the food they buy. And they say average American family could actually save $1,500 a year if they eliminated food waste. That is huge. My family is not the average American family. We have 10 people, so I'm sure that'd probably be closer to $3,000 or $4,000 for us. Now, I don't think I'm ever going to be one of those people who have a zero waste kitchen, at least at this point in my life with kids cooking in the kitchen. But you know that old saying, use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. Well, this originated during the Great Depression, and I really think most of us could apply this to our food. And the best way to do this, or at least the number one way that I have found, is with portion control. If you have children, it's so easy to overserve them, and they end up going through growth spurts. You don't always know how much they're going to eat. They don't have a steady appetite like we do. Or sometimes we let them serve themselves and they just take too much, and a lot of this gets thrown away. So lately I've really been trying to serve everybody a little bit less than I think they will eat. And this has really been great for eliminating food waste at the end of dinner. I know, it's so simple, serving people what they will actually eat. But especially with toddlers, oh my goodness, you know toddlers, they will rub their dinners on the wall, throw it on the floor, whatever else. And so giving them small amounts, they are more likely to eat what is there. And if they do waste some of it, well, it's less than they would have wasted if you had given them a full serving. And so it's important to remember that after dinner, when you have leftovers, you need to have a plan for those leftovers. Now, during the Great Depression, they did not have refrigerators. They might have something called a spring house, which is simply a little house built over running water, and the coolness from the water would help keep food from going bad, or they might have a cold room in their cellar. But they did not constantly have a refrigerator full of perishable goods. And we have this luxury of having the refrigerator, but so often the meals get pushed towards the back, and then you are cleaning out your fridge and find an a science experiment 2 weeks later because you forgot what was in there. So what I've been doing lately is kind of making a mental plan in my mind, either looking at my menu plans and thinking of a way that I could use the leftovers from that dinner. Let's say we have some leftover peas. I'd be thinking, well, I can use this in the pot pie later in the week. And if I'm not making anything or don't have a plan to make anything in the next few days, I will label it and stick it in the freezer. So a lot of times what I will have in the freezer is I will have a Tupperware or a bag that is labeled vegetables, and one that has beef and one that has chicken or pork, things that I can use, that I can incorporate into those one pot meals that I was talking about earlier, soups or casseroles. And that way I'm not wasting those portions of meat that maybe aren't quite enough for somebody, but should definitely be used, and that so often get forgotten about in our refrigerator. As far as leftovers, our family has gotten to the size where I really have to plan to have enough leftovers to make another meal. And sometimes I only have enough leftovers for 1 or 2 servings. So I try to put these in a Pyrex or a bag. And when there's somebody who needs a quick lunch, my husband needs a lunch for work, it is nice to have just that single serving ready. But make sure, the big thing here is to label everything before you put it in the freezer. Don't ask me how I know, but sometimes those leftovers become covered with frost and you have no idea what they are. And then I also find it really helpful to simply clean out my fridge at least once a week. I used to make it this huge chore where I took everything out and washed everything. And instead now, before I go shopping, I just move stuff around quickly and look and see if there are any of those Tupperwares left that I have somehow forgotten about. If there are, label them and stick them in the freezer. One pot meals, stretching your protein with whole grains, quality whole grains, and eliminating food waste by portion control and by having a plan for every little bit that is left over. And if you need some other ideas to help feed your family well on a budget, please consider watching these other videos in my series, How I Feed My Large Family.